All right, welcome to the lunchtime video. We're going to be closing out the final topic in IGPs and then moving on to another one. Hopefully we can do that by the end of the video today. Okay, so I will share my screen. All right, and now you can see the last video was about routing policy, because that's what this topic is about. So I did the familiar help apropos for the topic, and I can see here's all these examples. Unfortunately, I need to do Google searches to find this documentation. I have not yet figured out how to make a script on the device to search all of the documentation on the device for these specific words. I did try that in an earlier video, and to be honest, it doesn't seem like it would be that hard to do, but I unfortunately did have issues doing it. I wasn't able to save the output. I mean, I can briefly look into it now, but I definitely do want to keep moving because time is really at the essence. I've only got it's to the point where I've got probably 2.5 months right now, and really the most reasonable estimate of how much time I can put in is these 2 hours a day during lunch and during after work. So if I don't use them properly, I'm really going to run out of time. So so yeah, let's not worry about that then, and let's keep. One thing too, I have not forgot. Hopefully you're not yelling at the screen right now. The last video, I set up this topology just from memory. So this video I was going to go over and see how close I came to what they have down here. So it was kind of like checking my answers. So this was a big video. I almost forgot completely about that. So all right, but I could see, I mean, really, if they've all got their adjacencies, they've all got neighborships, which I did see that they all did. Show BGP summary. Yeah, as long as that is the case, there's really nothing that like it is correct, but one thing I might want to do as well is just try to do that routing policy to implement the community tag into ISIS from an Ebgp advertisement, because I did already go over this topic in my videos for studying for version 961 of the exam. So I believe I actually do have the knowledge and capability to do this. So if that is the case, then that's going to be a huge advantage for me during the test. So let's do a show BGP neighbors and make sure that Ebgp neighborship is up. Let's do a show BGP summary because it's a bit easier to see. There we go. So it is up. Okay, we got BGP neighbors there. We got ISIS adjacency. Okay, yeah, and this is the one that was not going to be running on. We're not running IBGP on all of the routers in accordance to the topology. I don't know if that's a mistake, but that's the way I'm going to do it. So the final step is going to be to advertise these networks here into the autonomous system 1. So I think I have a good idea of how to do that. So edit policy options, policy statement, and then it's going to be add to, so send to IS1. Okay, so we're going to be sending it out. So it's going to be an export policy. So let's think about what we're going to be exporting. So we're going to be exporting those two routes. So let's do a set from. So now we're just going to be matching things. So it's going to be from route filter. Yep. And we're going to need to do a list because we got multiple ones. Oh, actually, never mind. Roll filter list would be to call in a predefined list, but we don't have one, so we'll just do 10.2.0.0/16. Oops, not /26/16. Exact. Okay, and now the next one. All right, I'm going to show pipe display set. There we go. So we've got those. So now we'll need the next part, set, then accept. Right, and we can change up our policy a bit so that instead of just, but the thing is there is an implicit deny, but sometimes it's better to have that be explicit. In fact, every time it's better to have that be explicit, because then your policy statements are more clear and less likely to be misinterpreted. So we could do that. I think I'm happy with the way it is now. It's just going to be fine, I think. So now we're going to, yeah. So for sure, it's going to match these routes. It's going to accept them, and then if we go edit policy policy options, oh sorry, edit protocol BGP, and then group Ebgp, we go set export, send to AS1. Then we're doing it all. We're saying, okay, so if it matches here, then we'll accept it and we'll export it out. Well, what do I mean by it? If what matches there? We don't have any routes in our table that match this. If I do a run show route, there's nothing there. So we'll need to create that. So we'll just create static routes for each of these. Oh, this is interesting. BGP static, I've never seen that. I guess I'm curious why they don't want, because I have done many of these labs before and I've never seen this statement being used. So I'm just curious why they don't want it to be used in the labs. Maybe it's just because of the version they're using. Let's do static route. Okay. Okay, and then we'll do reject. So there's no next hop, no nothing. These are just dummy routes, just for the purposes of our lab. Okay, so everything hopefully will commit without issue. And now we'll see we'll see them showing up here, but they might be hidden. Oops, so I guess I don't see them showing up here. Let's do a show route. Okay, so let's do a show route, advertising protocol, BGP. So the neighbor is going to be, let's see here. So oops, I was checking the wrong router. Oh, but there's still nothing. Okay. So, oops, so this is advertising protocol. We want to see the routes that are received from this neighbor, not the routes that are advertised to that neighbor. So we're just plain not receiving any of these routes, which is interesting. We do have them in the routing table. Yeah, when we do have it properly exported. So yeah, I'm not sure what the issue is, maybe because it's reject, but let's look at the guide as if it were the answer key, and we'll see how far off I was. Because as I said before, this is a new topic, so I don't necessarily expect myself to have it mastered at this point, even though the test is about 3 months away, less than 3 months away. All right, so device A in our topology is going to be R1, R2, R3, R4, and R5. Okay, so we see there's a few things I didn't necessarily get wrong, but the kind of some bells and whistles I left out. So of course I got the addressing correct. It's really nothing too difficult about that. And I got the loopback addressing correct as well. They added an extra IPv4 address for the loopback, but I did not do that because it was not given in the topology, so it's not really an error. It's just they're adding more information than they're giving here. So next part is BGP. So yeah, my BGP is pretty darn skimpy. It looks like they have some extra configuration. They have type internal. They have local address. And then they also have additional neighbor statements too, which is interesting. They're forming neighborships to loopback addresses on multiple devices. I'm only forming a neighborship to my directly connected router. Okay, and then another thing they're doing that's interesting, everything else looks like it's the same. I've got my autonomous system, I've got my, oh, I didn't set my router ID, so that's usually a good idea too. But I also didn't disable level 1, which is going to be important to do because these are all in the backbone area. They should be level 2. Level 1 is just for areas that are our extra areas, kind of like an OSPF area 0. If you had area 1, 2, 3, those would all be level 1 routers, and then of course you need a level 1 and a level 2 router, so level 1-2 router as the ASPR, kind of the equivalent concept in OSPF, but then everything in your backbone area that isn't connected to other areas just gets purely level 2. So let's add those changes. So the first change we're going to need is we'll just add the extra loopback address to the interface. All right, and then we'll add the type to this as well. That's how I could get around those, because I had to specify if I do a show protocols, Ebgp Group, IGP, pipe display set. You can see I have the pure AS identified, but they do not, because if it's typed internal, they know what the pure AS is. It's going to match the same AS. So they're just different ways to configure it, either specifying the pure AS or making it typed internal. You're doing the same thing. But one thing that is going to be pretty important, especially since these are formed through loopback addresses, in fact, in that case, it's mandatory, is including this local address, but I did not include it because I did not know there were loopback addresses because they were not given in the topology. All right, but I can certainly add those. I think they're going to be necessary, so let's just make those changes. Okay, and we can delete both of these statements. They're just not in line with what the lab actually wants. The lab did not make it clear everything that was needed in the diagram, so it's not necessarily that I was mistaken and that I would fail a similar situation in the test. It's just that if I encountered this situation in the test where I felt there was not enough information on the topology or something like that, this is a situation where I need to raise my hand or in some way get the attention of the proctor and ask a question. That is something that is really highly encouraged on these tests, is to use the proctor, not to help you pass the test, but use the proctor to make sure that the test is fair, because there could be situations where things you're not meant to be tested on are something that might require you to spend time on and troubleshoot. And if that's the case, the proctor needs to take care of that. Like, for example, if a IP address is wrong in the lab, if it's not given, so if I get a topology like this and there's no loopback addresses, I might want to see if I can ask the proctor, hey, where are the loopback addresses? But of course, I could just make up my own loopback addresses. It's just a matter of what I'm being asked to do that determines what kind of information I need. But I just figured I'll bring this up as an example where I might need to flag down the proctor, test exam proctor, because that was something that was recommended in a question and answer session I attended on this exam. All right. So, yep, I got rid of my own attempt at BGP, which wasn't necessarily incorrect, but it was just based on incomplete information. and I'll continue to call it IGP. Okay, so now this is a step I definitely did not do. I kind of knew that something like this was recommended, but I didn't know the details of it. So I'm really glad to be learning that right now. Oops, and I'm going to need to do a show pipe display set relative, and then set interfaces. Disable. Okay, perfect. So, one final thing, always a good idea, no matter what protocol you're working with, is to set the router ID. That's always recommended. Then you don't need to guess about what those IDs might be. It's pretty predictable, but it saves you time and effort. Okay, so let's see how close I got to router 2. Router 1, I think I'd give myself good marks. The only thing I would be sure to include in my next ones are this level 1 disable, as long as they're all in the same area. And as long as that area is the backbone area, or the equivalent to that in ISIS. And then also the local address, and I knew that was going to be important. I chose to leave it out because I did not know that loopback address IPv4 addresses were going to be a part of this topology because they were not given. But let's look at router 2 and see how close I came on that. Okay, so set chassis network services. So here's where it starts to match what's here. So yep, same deal with the interfaces, really easy to get right. All right, so the protocol, same thing. I had used a different method to specify whether it was internal or external. And I did not specify the local address because I was not going to be using loopbacks. So let's change that to be what is given in the exercise. All right, so I cleaned up my protocols for both BGP and for ISIS. So got a few more things left to go. I've got routing options. I need the router ID. All right, and the final thing is an IPv4 address on the loopback 0 interface. All right, so everything's good to go on this one. This configuration is very similar to router 1's configuration, so I made the same mistakes, you could call them. I mean, the configuration would still work, except for the big one is this local address. So that's important to include no matter what, just because of how badly it can affect things if you don't have it there and you need it. And then there's no harm if you don't need it. But of course, as I've said, that's just because of the information included in the topology. It's not necessarily a mistake. But let's commit this, and router 3, so which corresponds to device C, is where things are going to be a lot more complicated. Yep, and the other thing that's interesting, and this is something I kind of knew, but again, I don't really expect myself to be an expert in this because this is what I'm learning now, is that you do need a policy on this router as well, because you've got to move the routes from Ebgp to IBGP. So it's not just that you need a policy on router 5, you also need one on the other Ebgp router. But let's see how close I got. So interfaces. Yep, same deal, except of course not including an IPv4 address on the loopback. So I'll start with that. Okay, so next is BGP. Okay, so we can see my, okay, so in this case, my configuration is quite a bit different. You can see it's really stripped down. I've only got 2 statements per each. So here they've got more statements than that. Oops, and it looks like they have a neighborship with this device, .14. Oh, which is going to be, oh, okay, never mind, they don't. They have it with .1 and .2. So they have a BGP, IBGP adjacency to router 1 and router 2 on here, which is interesting. All right, I'm going to pause it and come back in a minute. All right, I am back. So let's continue to look at the answer key here versus what I had. So, yep, they've got this. This is essential. They did a different route than I did, but I kind of like this one a little better because it makes it more clear. And then they have additional neighbors. So let's clear off my configuration. Okay, and then we'll add the configuration as given in the lab. Oops, so we'll need to edit the group, and I'll use my own naming for this, IBGP. Okay, so now it's time for the Ebgp group. And I'll skip over this statement for now because it's going to be a bigger thing to explain. Now, one thing that you will notice that is essential for Ebgp is the neighbor is quite a bit different. Instead of it being a loopback address, it is the address directly across the link. So that's the most common way for Ebgp connections to be configured. So the other thing you'll notice is that we don't have the local address because, as you saw from my configurations, it is not necessary to include if you are forming a neighborship directly across the link. Okay, so yeah, everything looks good here. Of course, before we commit that, we've got one more statement. And this is an export policy to make sure that router 5 has all of the necessary routes in the topology. Okay, so now let's skip a little bit, skip down here and get a sense for what this policy is actually doing. Because this part I did not even have at all in my configurations. So this actually, I think, would have legitimately been points off on the test, even though the topology did not have all of the necessary information in it. I think it's problematic for me not to have known that I did need a policy like this for an Ebgp router. Oh, so it looks like I made a mistake here, so I'm going to need to delete it and recreate it. All right, so that looks good. Let's go back up here and then keep moving down the given list of commands. So next command is going to be export edu to ISIS. So let's skip over that and check the other commands first to see how close I came. Okay, so we got some interesting differences here. So the obvious difference, and this is something I kind of knew, but it just wasn't very clear in my mind. It's a lot more clear in my mind now, is that you do need to manually disable level 1 for any connection that is either purely a backbone connection or Well, I think that's the only situation where you would need to disable level 1 adjacency, is if it's purely between a backbone connection. If it's across a backbone connection to another periphery area, you still need level 2. And then if it's only in a periphery area, then you can make it level 1. So okay, but any case, if it is within the main area, the backbone area, it would be called an OSPF, then you do need to disable level 1. Oh, so this is interesting. This is for the same interface, and this is the interface going to the Ebgp peer. There they actually have, oh, they have level 1 disabled, so no surprises there. But they do have level 2 passive. I actually was mistaken when I read this. I saw, you know, disable 3 times, and I read this and I thought, oh, level 2 disable. So mistakenly, I just thought just now that they had level 1 and level 2 disabled. So that's kind of my big surprise there. But it turns out that what they're actually saying is level 1 is disabled, but level 2 is enabled. It's just we're not going to send any ISIS updates down that link because there's no need to. Router 5 is not running ISIS, so we can make it a passive interface. All right, so there's just one more interface left, and I'm kind of surprised they didn't make this one passive too, but that's fine. It's not going to change anything. Okay, so the final statement that's required for ISIS is to export these. So I'm not sure what. So this is the crux of this lab. This is adding the community string, which is 2:5. That's the community string. This is the name of the community, and then you do edu members, and then you specify the string here. So it's adding that to the routes that are sent over to router 5. So let's do set export edu to ISIS. And this is so you can do more advanced filtering of the routes. And you can do it based on groups of the routes, because once you've got 500,000 routes in your table, you're not going to be able to specify them individually. They're going to be all different kinds, but if you want to say, you know, I've got 2 uplinks to router 1 and router 2, only router 1s are allowed here, only router 2s are allowed there. You can set up a community, as we're doing here, on router 1 and router 2, and assign them tags to all the routes, so it can be any route at all, it can be any number of routes, and you know which routes are being sent in which manner. Just because they've been tagged, you don't need any extra information about the routes themselves, just the meta information you added with that tag. All right, so let's do the, so before we do this one, let's, because we're going to be pulling in this, so it's not currently defined, so let's define the thing we're pulling in before we pull it in. Okay, and there's a delivery. I mean, it's just a, Jesus, it's just a truck out back. So I'm going to do this. Members 2:5. Okay, so now the next step is to set up the policy that actually pulls in this community that we just named edu. Okay, so we're just going to have one term, so I will go into edit mode from there. So all of our BGP routes we want matched. And then in addition to that, any route tagged with the 2:5 community string. But it's not a protocol, it's a community. All right, and then we're going to, and it's not a matter of yeah, it's not a matter of whether or not they're put in the table. We're just going to be assigning them a particular, well, it might be, but we're just going to be changing the metric on these routes. Okay, so then this one we already did because we pulled it up before. So the last step is the router ID. Okay, so everything is hopefully good to go. All right, and let's see how close I got with router 4. It'll be interesting to see if there is a BGP neighborship meant to be formed. Nope, so they were correct in their topology. They did not intend for a IGP neighborship. So this is going to have the most stripped down configuration. You can see mine, again, doesn't have the loopback interface because it was not given. Okay, but in addition to that, where you could say I might be losing a little bit of points is I forgot to disable level 1 in ISIS in the backbone area. Oops, so I'm not going to be doing it here. I'm going to be doing set protocols ISIS interface. Level 1 disable. Okay, so let's do edit protocols ISIS. All right, so final thing is the router ID. Oops, so here's something that's kind of interesting. So even though they didn't want IGP neighborship, they set the autonomous system. Well, I don't know what that's going to do. I don't think the autonomous system is relevant for ISIS. Maybe they're thinking of it basically like having a host name, which just makes things easier to understand which autonomous system it belongs to, especially if you don't have anything that technically makes it belong to a autonomous system. In that case, it's especially important to just have that label assigned to it. So we'll do that. I don't know what they were thinking. Maybe it was that, maybe it wasn't, but I don't see any issue with adding this command. So let's do a commit and quit. Yeah, when I do the commit and quit, the space and then the and is right here, the n is right here. So you know which finger goes faster, this one or this one. This one goes a lot faster, so I usually do commit NA instead of AN. Okay, so final one, it's right at 5. So hopefully this one I got closer on because I did know that a policy was required on here and I took an attempt to configure it. So we've got interfaces just like before. Yep, I got that correct. Oops, but then I did have the loopback address, of course. Now, of course, you can't use Unit 7. This is something I had submitted for feedback to them, and they actually did send me an email saying that they corrected that. But they clearly, we can see they only corrected it for the ones I submitted that had an issue. All right, so looks like they want some more addresses. I kind of don't understand why these are necessary if you've got those special static routes, but I will add them nonetheless. So let's see how close my configuration is here. So I do have the export statements, just like they do. They called it statics, though. I called it send to AS1. So let's keep that naming, but let's delete everything under here. Okay, and now set up the commands again. We'll do edit group, Ebgp, set type external, set peer AS1, set neighbor 25. Okay, but then we'll, for the export policy, just use the naming I came up with. All right, and now let's go into that policy and edit it. Okay, so quite a bit different. They're using static instead of, and then they're assigning a community to it, of course. I've been using a route filter. I think that will work, but of course, if I add more static routes, I will need to add more route filters. So my way is definitely requiring more administrative overhead. So it's definitely not the best way to do it. But it is, as far as I know, a valid way. So kind of no points deducted for that if I were to grade myself. Now the grading on the exam is based on results. It's not based on methods. So if you get it to work and you used, for example, in BGP, if you specified the local and the remote AS instead of type internal or type external, you would get the same number of points, regardless of if you specify type internal or if you define the local AS and then use the statement peer AS to be the same as the local AS. They accomplish the same things, so they get the same number of points. Likewise, if you have type internal and the AS, you have extra config. As long as it doesn't ruin your final result, you won't get deducted points for having sloppy extra config. It'll just make things harder on you to troubleshoot. But from what I understand, that's the way the grading goes. It's about the results. It's not about the methods. So, and in fact, it was suggested in the Q&A I went to that if you can't get the results the way they want you to, you can get more points by finding a kind of hacky workaround solution to just on the as a facade get the results. Like, for example, just using route filters, just using static IPs. So if it's a question about OSPF and they want you to do OSPF configuration, but ultimately the purpose of that configuration is to get a route to show up in a particular way, if you can get that route to show up in a particular way, not using OSPF, you will still get points. You won't get the full points, but that is a better thing to do than to just give up and just not have that route show up the way they want it to show up. Okay, so let's do a show pipe display set relative. And yep, so we've got everything looking good there. So next is going to be, oops, and I did it a bit out of order because I don't have the community set, even though I'm calling it in now. One thing I can do is a commit check, and you will see a error message for that because I'm calling in a policy that is not defined. EDU community reference but not defined, so let's define it. All right, so time for static routes. Okay, so I'm missing install too, which makes sense. That's probably the main reason why it wasn't showing up in the routing table actually. So I probably had everything for the most part correct, especially in terms of being able to see routes show up in router 3. But I just forgot this one key statement to have them be installed. But I'm kind of surprised it wouldn't have shown up as a hidden route if I didn't have that or something. All right, so one final command. Oops, so we've got a problem here. We don't have a next hop under edit routing options static. But I thought you didn't need one. Now also I'm using the wrong subnet mask. So let's fix that. Okay, so it works now. Yep, so this just means that, oh, well, maybe because this statement here was incorrect, it made it so that the other statement was not valid because it required the next hop. But if I have this statement be correct, the next hop is no longer required. That appears to be what has happened. So I gotta get back to work. I've even got a call at 1 o'clock. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.